The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, coming to you from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network, Star Cable, and the X-Zone Broadcast Network, plus our growing family of worldwide affiliates. That's right across Canada, the United States, Central America, the Caribbean, South America, the Pacific Rim, Australia, Asia, India, Africa, and Europe. If you'd like to give us a call toll-free worldwide, 1-800-610-7035. My email address is xzoneradio. I'm sorry, no, that's MSN Messenger. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is Dr. Joyce Pugh. And Dr. Pugh has written 3 books, which are entitled AntiChrist, the Cloned Image of Jesus Christ, which was published in December 1999. Colors of Joy, published in August of 1975. Eden, the Knowledge of Good and Evil, 666, which was published in December of 2006. And Audio Eden, the Knowledge of Good and Evil, 666. That was updated in January 2009. We're going to be talking to the good doctor today about a number of topics. We're going to be talking about the Holy Grail. We're going to be talking about cloning. We're going to be talking about Tesla technology and much more. Dr. Joye Pugh is my special guest. Her website is www.drjoye.com. Dr. Joye, welcome to the X-Zone.
Oh, I'm looking so forward to being your guest today, Rob.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Doctor, and where the interest came for the fascinating topics that you write about.
Well, I think as a young person, I began having information that I felt was being given to me at church in regard to a little dream that I had had when I was 6 years old that did not seem to add up to what I thought I had seen as far as the end of time. And so I began a really long life journey of trying to find pieces to the puzzle and answer questions that I felt were really answerable, but no one had really looked for them. So my span of trying for probably the last 40 years has been to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And so my book, Eden, the Knowledge of Good and Evil, is actually a 7-year night and day work for actually myself that I've been able to have published by a publisher and now offer it to those who are also interested in these same questions that probably a lot of people could not answer for them and left them probably scratching their head much like it did me as I was growing up through my lifetime.
Dr. Joye, what was the pivotal event in your career as an author?
Well, I think being able to find answers to a lot of the questions that I had, and then having someone be willing to publish this for me was probably pivotal in the fact that I never dreamed when I was looking for these answers that I would ever have the opportunity to share them with enormous amounts of people really from all around the world. And I have had the opportunity to do this now through the World Wide Web because I have, emails and talk shows that I do and things like that. So I think that's been pivotal, is that I've been able to share this research with a huge growing number, as far as an audience, who have had these questions and could not have them answered. And so I feel like that I'm able to maybe provide some of those answers to some of those really tough questions about why we're here, what was the reason we were designed by God, and what are the days that we're living in as far as prophecy and science tell us are going to happen as we move closer to 2012 and 2019, according to my work. All right,
stand by, Dr. Joye. You and I have to take a 2-minute commercial break. X-Zone Nation, Dr. Joye Pugh is our special guest, www.drjoye.com. My name's Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, Old Florida cuisine at its best. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone broadcast network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
This is Johanna Carroll, host of Dialogue with Divinity on the X Zone Broadcast Network. While walking along Kaanapali Beach in Maui this past year, I kept discovering all these shells and coral in the shape of hearts. My dialogue with Divinity was very simple. Do you want me to do a retreat to heal people's hearts in Maui next year? And of course, the answer was yes. As a master spiritual teacher, I am offering you a neat retreat called Rise, May 8th through the 12th, 2017, and the chance of a lifetime to rest at a 5-star resort for 5 days and experience a spiritual renewal of your heart and soul. Kaanapali is one of the top 5 beaches in the world. This stunning resort has undergone a $40 million renovation. I walked the entire property, checked out the room choices on your behalf, and I must say it is stunning. Our conference room faces the ocean with sliding glass doors. Maui is known as Mother Maui because it is a soft, gentle, healing energy. In the embrace of Mother Maui, you will feel yourself rising from the limitations of an ordinary life to an extraordinary journey of peace, bliss, and harmony. A greater sense of clarity. Our Rise retreat ignites renewal in the sacred elements of air, water, earth, fire, and wind. There's plenty of free time to enjoy all that Maui has to offer. A small deposit is required now to reserve your space, as this retreat, it will sell out. For more details, please go to johannacarroll.com and register today. Aloha, and I'll see you in mystical Maui.
Well, there's a blast from the past, the Grassroots and Temptation Eyes. My guest this hour is Dr. Joye Pugh. Her website is drjoye.com. I have to ask you a question right off the top, Dr. Joye. Is the Holy Shroud of Turin the Holy Grail?
Well, my research really does prove that. In fact, really the greatest evidence for bodily resurrection and life after death is actually the Holy Shroud of Turin. So it's been the most researched relic of all history. And in looking at that particular piece of cloth, you can go back and pull up in the Bible, in the book of John, it specifically says that after the crucifixion of Jesus, that he was actually put in a linen burial cloth and laid in the tomb. And that when the disciples all came to see, I guess, why his body was not there, when Mary Magdalene came back to tell them that he had gone or whatever, they found these particular linen cloths there in the tomb. And, of course, the shroud is actually under the jurisdiction of the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church, and is being housed right now in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. In fact, of May of this year, it's going to be on display for those who want to travel there to Turin to see it. In fact, even the History Channel has just recently done a documentary and showing that the shroud is actually 14 feet long, and it appears that there is a form of energy that produced this burst of kind of a radiation that went through the cloth that apparently left a perfect image of a crucified Christ as we know it, from the book of John, in regard to him being resurrected from the dead. And it appears that the wounds on the body of this cloth also have a correlation to what would be going on if a person, let's say, had been crucified. That means that this image shows whippings, it shows the crown of thorns, it shows nail prints, it actually shows the wound from a spear that went into Jesus' side, and that the wounds themselves were very much inflicted injuries. In other words, there was a lot of blood that was left there, and it covers really a major portion of the shroud. And when I was doing the research in my first book on AntiChrist, I found out that they had actually gone in and done some scientific work back in 1968 and found that there was DNA there and that it was tested and it belonged to a male, as well as there were duplicate pairs of that DNA strand that were isolated from the blood, and apparently there was some cloning that took place. It was kind of a secret situation, but something had actually been taken from that cloth and been analyzed. And then they took a NASA VP8 image analyzer, and it showed that this particular image on this cloth could not be painted because it was actually a three-dimensional body that appeared to move in the cloth like an X-ray would do. And I found that quite interesting because the fact of the matter is that over the course of history, we've always thought that that particular piece of cloth was not maybe a true relic. And, of course, people have always said, well, it was fake, it was painted, it was this, it was that. But I have always contended from the research that I had done that the cloth itself was, in fact, the real burial cloth of Jesus, and that something magnificent had happened. And being able to correlate that is the fact that there was a face napkin that was put on Jesus' face at the time of his crucifixion. And that face napkin is now housed in Oviedo, Spain. It has been there, for right after the first, actually, like 500 AD, it was already in Oviedo, Spain. And if you take the face napkin and you place it over this area of the shroud where Jesus' face would have been, that face imprint of the shroud has the same location of the facial blood spots that are on the face napkin and the shroud. So when I had done this research and found that the DNA, the identical blood, the fact that the blood spots were the same, it kind of correlated that if somebody had been able to take a picture or paint, they would have been able to have done that like 500 AD, which I don't think that there was anything that was capable of producing something of that, that magnificence capability. In fact, I don't think that anybody today can actually produce what has been on the shroud. There's been many who have tried, but it just either is distorted or something's really strange about it. But when I started doing the history, Rob, about the Shroud of Turin, I found out that it had actually moved through time and was actually first known as the cloth of Edessa, and it was actually hid in the walls of Edessa to protect it. And unfortunately, according to history, the Order of the Knights Templar were the ones who came searching for that particular cloth, and that they found it, took it, for the ultimate reason, according to what I've been able to uncover, was the fact that they wanted to regenerate the divine spark of Jesus by replicating his holy blood using a sacred science that they knew all about that was called alchemy. And so the shroud, I think, became the Holy Grail because it was a guarded secret that had been passed down really through time, wanting to make that shroud live again. And, of course, we know just from Vatican information that the last Knight Templar, Sir Geoffrey Chauncey, actually upon his death, gave the shroud to King Umberto II of Italy. And, of course, then in 1983, Umberto was dying, he bequeathed it to the late John Paul II, and actually gave a decree of ownership to the Vatican. And so that's why the Vatican actually owns that piece of cloth today. But the fact that the Holy Grail legend is centered on a myth that actually stems from the Crusades, that a vessel was supposedly carry the blood of Jesus. And so many times we have seen that depicted in historical record as a Grail cup. But after doing so much research on the Holy Shroud, there is so much blood on that cloth that if you fold it up and you were to hold it, it would be like you were holding, the blood of Jesus in a cup. So to me, I think their ultimate quest was to use their wisdom, which of course they call Sophia, and that they were wanting to initiate their people to understand that there was a plan to really raise Jesus from a child into a man again. And some of the esoteric teachings, like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, kind of go along with that, because they were, the Templar were actually known as the guardians of the Holy Grail and the owners of the blood of Jesus.
Wait a second here, Doctor. That puts a whole new spin on to something else that popped in my mind as you were talking. Is it possible that this is what they are referring to as the second coming of Christ, his rebirth through cloning?
Oh, yes. And I think that that's why this is so important, and my work has really shown that it to be true. It's something that, a lot of people, when I first started talking about the terms of cloning a man, and I was speaking of this way back in the 1990s when people were like, not even, I guess they thought it was science fiction.
Yes.
And I'm saying this is a possibility because I had uncovered some research that had been done in the underground bases of Hitler's regime with his scientists, and it was becoming very perfected. And then when I did the research on the cloning, I realized that being able to clone is not hard at all. It can be done in a high school laboratory. So that put a real emphasis that there was, the possibility that these crusaders, they did not really want the world to know that they had stolen really the Holy Shroud for the purpose of one day regenerating Jesus' divine blood, but they wanted to do it through a noble and royal bloodline. And I found it interesting that the shroud, of course, that came from actually Joseph of Arimathea, and we know that he wrapped Jesus in this burial cloth, but the thing that really stood out to me was that I later found out that the descendants of Joseph of Arimathea were actually, according to Masonic history, that they went on to found the priestly House of Wales. And, of course, we know the House of Wales there in Britain declares to be descended from the lineage of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. So there was a real connection as to bringing, why was that brought through history, and why does it end up where it's at, and the correlation between royal bloodlines and Templars. But there is a major, major correlation between all of that.
Is it possible then, let's say that Christ is cloned, maybe they've already done it. Is it possible that the cloned version of Christ will be mistaken as the Antichrist?
It would be very easy to do that because we know from the science of cloning that the product is an exact replica of whoever the cell is taken from. For example, if we were to take a skin cell from you, Rob, and we were to place that skin cell in a egg that had been actually, you take a woman's egg and you clean all the DNA, everything out of it, and you just puncture in your cell, and then you just place that cell into a woman and as an egg, and then after 9 months when she delivers, there will not be any DNA that would come from her egg. It would be a total new Rob. And the thing about it is, you would not be able to tell the difference between you and the twin. In other words, it's a little even better than a twin, because in some cases the twin has a difference in sometimes the iris patterns, but in this case it's an identical replica of you.
All right, so let's just take this one step further. Let's say in the near future, let's say in the next 5-10 years, this person comes up who has charisma, who has knowledge, who has the ability to bring total peace, as talked about in the Bible. Is this a biblical prophecy coming true, and is it possible that people would mistake this person who is doing so good as the Antichrist based on the hype that society has put on the Antichrist, instead of keeping the possibility open that the Antichrist is really the second coming of Christ?
Well, the thing that always stood out to me was in Thessalonians, where it said that this Antichrist would claim himself to be God, standing in the temple of God.
So there we are.
And the one thing that always stood out to me was that Jesus made the comment to the Pharisees about raising the temple, and they thought he meant that building a building.
That's right.
And they said, how could he do that in 3 days? He was talking about his body. And so I find that the word temple in that Thessalonians remark could very well mean the temple of God, which would be Jesus' body as the temple. And through cloning, and what I've been able to uncover with what I have researched, is that a clone would not have a theoretical soul, because the Bible says that once you die, the soul, that's, you don't come back and relive again and again in the body situation. So the soul has to go through a different process, and since the soul left, which we know was resurrected and walked away from this image, then that particular being still exists. But if you take and you clone that, then that leaves a vehicle without a soul. And according to the Talmud, you can go back and see that there were beasts of the field that did not have souls, but yet they were in male and female-looking bodies.
Stand by, Dr. Pugh. You and I have got to take a commercial break. I've tried to keep it as long as I could, but we've run out of time. Dr. Joye Pugh is our special guest. What an interesting lady. Her website is www.drjoye.com. I'll be back with a good doctor on the other side of this commercial break as the X Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and Star Cable. Don't go away.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. And welcome back, everyone. Dr. Joye Pugh is our very special guest this hour. Her website is www.drjoye.com, and the name of her book is AntiChrist, the Cloned Image of Jesus Christ. You know what? Cloning was first talked about in the Bible in the book of Genesis when God took a rib from Adam and made Eve. Isn't that cloning?
Well, there's been a lot of question about what really took place in that situation. If we had used, in other words, if he had used the direct cell and had done it the way that I had just mentioned earlier,
right,
it would have produced another Adam specifically. So if we look at that and we look at the science of the nature that we're doing now, there's no way that could have been a cloning aspect, almost as if he took certain things that were there and left out certain. Of course, men believe that the women got the worst of the deal and they got the best, so I don't know which way to take it, but it had to be a little bit different than just the cloning aspect, or it would have been a duplicate process of
all right, so
Adam.
Let me suggest this hypothesis, that the first experimentation of the second one, because Lilith was the first creation, then you had Eve. Could this have been a scientist who may have or may not come from this planet, who was conducting experimentation here on this planet of genetic engineering or even, early types of clones, and he goofed and made a mistake, and thus you have Eve.
Well, some men may feel that that's really what happened. I can laugh about it, but no, I really don't think that was the case. Although I do believe in doing research into Genesis, that your first part of chapter 1 there, where it mentions male and female, that those were actually a different breed than what the Genesis 2 account is. And the fact that they were not named Adam, or that there was a name of Eve. And I think probably prior to that was probably some of the mythological things in regard to Lilith and those kinds of things that have come out of the generations, because it specifically says these are the generations of the earth. And I think that's one thing in chapter 2 there in Genesis that a lot of people miss. But the fact that Adam was created and given a breath of life, and then Eve, that there was something uniquely different about them, and I believe it was the breath of life, and that being the living soul, much different than an animal that would not have a living breath or a living soul.
But how do we know that? How do we know, Doctor, and no disrespect meant here, how do we know that animals don't have living souls?
Well, that is something that we really do not know. There's no way for us not to know, in regard what their process really is.
But aren't human beings animals?
Well, I believe that, like I say, in Genesis 1, where it mentions about the male and female, I think that was a little bit different process than what we are as far as a living spiritual being. And knowing that we have the capability of freedom of choice, and knowing good and evil, there seems to separate us from the animal kingdom in one specific thing, and that is marriage. And I found that was quite strange in the end of Genesis chapter 2, that God actually married Adam and Eve. This did not happen in chapter 1 in regard to the male and female that he told to just go and to replenish the earth. And I find the word replenish interesting there, because if there was something prior to that, why were they, it would have been go and just, have children or whatever, but not replenish. The word replenish sounds like something had to have happened prior to, and that they were coming back and replenishing, no different than what he told Noah and his family to replenish. But the fact that he married Adam and Eve tells me there was something very sanctified or very different about this situation, because in an animal population, we know that the animals will typically go with this one or that one or whatever, and not be maybe true to
male
or female being a marriage situation.
Doctor, if we're talking about let's use a hypothetical situation where a pup, when it grows up, will have sex with his mother, and the mother dog will have puppies, right?
That's right.
Okay, so didn't Cain or Abel do that with Eve in order to replenish the earth?
Well, I feel like, again, that there was, I believe, male and female that were created in chapter 1 that's different than chapter 2. And I think that this is probably where Cain, when he went off and that he was able to build a city and do what he was able to do, that there was probably a significant reason why those other beings had existed. We know from archaeological record that there were things like Neanderthals and other types of Homo sapiens that apparently existed at some of the same time that we as Homo sapiens have existed. So it tells you that there had to be an offshoot. The other thing is that the DNA of the replica from, let's say, Adam and Eve, with them being created by God, there would have not been any kind of tainted DNA. So that tells you that they could replicate themselves without any tainted or changed DNA. But the problem is, we see in chapter 4, is that the sons of God came against the daughters of man, and they produced giants. So to be able to get a giant population, there had to be a significant change in the DNA that was initially started. And that gives you reason to know that there had to be intervention from something other than just Adam and Eve and their children having sex or having children or whatever.
But Doctor, don't you think that at times we, the human race, put way too much credence in a book that is just a science fiction book at the very best? Because we cannot substantiate or prove anything except the odd piece of history here, there, and everywhere, that the events in the book were actually real.
Right. In other words, the Bible is telling you real events that really did occur. Is that what you're saying?
No, ma'am. I'm saying that the Bible is, for one thing, was not written by God. Genesis was written by Moses. How many years after the events? The people back then in the day when the Bible was written, they had no knowledge of science. They had no knowledge of physics. They had no knowledge of chemistry. They were shepherds. They were very plain people. And I believe that in our quest, in our thirst to justify our existence and the errors that we have made in our lifetimes, we use the Bible too much as a crutch. And that we don't give our own species, mankind, enough credit. You know, we can look at the Bible, and it's a matter of interpretation. It's a matter of belief. But I don't give 100% belief in what the Bible says.
Well, I think because I've had the opportunity to look at other works in regard to the Sumerians and Babylonians and some of the works that have come out of there that we know that have been translated from the cuneiform text, it appears that there were similar situations that occurred that actually correlate to what the Bible has specifically said to us. And I do think it's quite interesting that sometimes that when people have written books in the Bible, that some of the information was well beyond their capability. And one of those people is specifically John of Patmos. I find it very interesting that a man who walked with God as John the Divine, there, and who was a disciple, who ends up on Patmos, and he has these visions that we now know were the book of Revelation. It's interesting to me that a man of that, living in that period of time, would have had such revelation of some things that I feel are happening today.
But doctor, you're an author. You're a well-scholared person. We all know that there are such things as ghostwriters, and people pen their name and take the credit for the writing. How do we know what really happened at the Council of Nicaea, where it was decided what was going in, what chapters were getting edited out? There are too many unknown variables. I agree with you that there are different philosophies, there are different legends, there are different folklores, there are different accounts throughout the different religious philosophies that would validate certain events that happened, because that area of the world at that time was very small. Their world, it was the Middle East. That was their world. The writings of the Bible do not encompass North America, South America. It doesn't encompass Australia. So their world that they're talking about was a very small area. So that if something did happen in one part of their little world, yes, and if it was a significant enough event, everyone would eventually know about it. So my point is, number one, how do we know that John actually wrote it? Number two, how do we know, based on the lack of verifiable information on the rest of the world events, that this is just not a book of fiction? And why do some people put so much faith in it?
Well, I think that the thing about it is no different than what we were talking about earlier about the cloth. If for some reason anything had been deviated or changed from, let's say, the first group of people who came together under Jesus as disciples and his followers and the teachings that existed there, once Peter and Paul, they began to go about and talk about what had happened and what they had seen. And of course, if things had been handed down, if something was different, then somebody would have either said, "Well, that's not correct. I was there." It would be a rebuttal about it.
But if the Bible was edited, and even the King Henry was one of the editors of the Bible, how do we know that these truths didn't surface? And in order to keep the continuity with the church and beliefs, that these truths were not deliberately left out and suppressed?
I do think that there is a possibility that in any time that you do translations from like Hebrew and Greek, that the translation to the English language can be very not really forthcoming as to the way that it was originally intended. And I found those issues and have tried to address those issues a lot of times in the research and the work that I do, because it will help explain a lot sometimes when you're not really sure about what a verse is trying to say, if you go back and look at what the Hebrew and the Greek translation was. The thing that I find most interesting in doing this research, and especially in the Bible, is to look at the biblical codes and the equidistant letter sequencing that has gone and has been developed throughout the years and throughout history, because it was used prior to with people who just did nothing but counting letters. But I find it strange that when you look at that and you see that you can bring up dates and times of people's births and deaths and names, that chance of correlation would be almost impossible if you were just writing a work, just say making it up or trying to
okay, now hold on here.
Make similarities.
What language was the Bible first written in?
Well, you've got the Hebrew, and then, of course, in the New Testament, you have the Greek.
Okay, now Christ was born. The story of Christ is in the New Testament, right?
That's right.
Why wasn't it written in Hebrew? Why was it written in Greek? If Christ and the other disciples were there, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, why was it written in Greek and then translated into Hebrew? Why wasn't it written in Hebrew first and then translated into Greek?
Well, see, you have the situation where in the Old Testament you had what was called the Hebrews and the Israelites that came out of Egypt. And when they were captive to the Babylonians, then the true lineage of the Hebrew or the Israelite as we know it became an all-encompassing term called Jew. And so many people do not understand when you say the word Jew that you're not talking about the Israelites or the Hebrews. You're actually talking about a mixed breed of people. And at that particular time of being mixed with the Babylonians, then your Mosaic law became infiltrated with Babylonian paganisms. And the mixture produced things that are like the Zohar and some of those other kinds of works that were written. And once Jesus came into being and he began to preach a little bit different than what the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and the scribes were wanting to hear, it was a kind of a deviation. And so at that point, because only the people who were like Israelites and Hebraic, which were the true first Christians, when they started deviating like that, the biggest spread of, I guess, literature at the time was in the Greek language, and that's how it was brought about in such greater context, is through that.
All right, we've got to take a commercial break here, Doctor.
Back
we've got
understanding.
Hello. I've got to take a break. Take a breath. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break. Wow. 1-800-610-7035 is toll-free right around the world. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. The April edition of the X Chronicles is coming out tomorrow. If you'd like to get your complimentary copy, send me your email address. I'll send you a link where you can read it or download it online. And then for the Power Gators TV show, all the information, all the updates, all the additions to the cast and the crew is at www.paragators.org. My name's Rob McConnell, and this is the X Zone. Once again, our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
19 Sergeant Central. 19 Sergeant, check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
True healing must address 4 levels: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, for us to live joyful and productive lives. We tend to treat 3 of the 4, leaving the spiritual languishing. If you're tired of the same dysfunctional patterns cropping up in your life, Soul Balancing is for you. Trixie Phelps, owner and founder of Soul Balancing, is a naturally gifted energy healer trained in numerous esoteric forms, including shamanism. Trixie has created a powerful modality that safely and effectively clears your energetic field. A soul balancing session can remove interference, heal trauma, and restore your hope. Contact Trixie for a life-changing long-distance session today, www.soulbalancing.world.
Dr. Joye Pugh is our special guest, Exonation. I love her passion for her topic. The name of her book is AntiChrist, the Cloned Image of Jesus Christ. Her website is www.drjoye.com. Doctor, I have 2 very simple questions for you. Number 1, if these events really happened and Christ was surrounded by apostles who knew he was the Son of God, why did they not chronicle the events in Hebrew? That's number 1. Number 2, how do we know the DNA that is on the Shroud of Turin is actually that of Jesus Christ and not someone else who suffered the same type of crucifixion that Christ did?
Well, I think that there's probably a lot of things that are out there, in fact, in regard to what the disciples and apostles were involved with. I'd also believe that some of the books that we found, in Qumran, typically would tell us of the Old Testament, that how it was kept and how it was rewritten and kept forward and whatever, throughout history. But at the same time, I feel like that the writings that came down from the apostles themselves and the names and things, the writings appear to have really been during the time period or there after the time period. And like I said earlier, that if they had been written wrong, that someone who had lived during that would have been able to say, well, that's not correct, or they wouldn't have gone along with it. So I typically believe that the writings were as they say they were, and I don't have anything that I feel like I've ever seen that would discredit that for me.
All right, and my second question is, how do you know that the blood that is on the Shroud of Turin is actually that of Jesus Christ and not someone else who may have had the same type of crucifixion done on him? And this is totally a different person, and it's not the body of Christ.
Well, the thing that I found most interested in doing this research, and I do have 2 of the videos on my website at www.drjoye.com in regard to the research and findings of a archaeologist named Ron Wyatt, who is said to have gotten the blood that was of Jesus from the Ark of the Covenant that he found in one of the chambers below where Solomon's temple actually was, which was below the area where Jesus was crucified. And the blood that he brought forward and actually he tested, and you can see those videos there, shows that blood is not dead, but it's alive. And the other interesting fact was that it doesn't have the same number of chromosomes. And I found that interesting because of the fact that he was born from a woman, but yet there seems to be no father, just like an X chromosome. The interesting thing of all of that is that the blood is alive, and that was one of the things that I think has been kept very, very secret in regard to the Holy Shroud of Turin, why it's been kept under wrap and key, and why it's been said that those who have taken anything from that shroud, that the Vatican has tried desperately to get all the samples back and not be available for testing and that kind of thing. So I feel like that because the blood is different, because it has apparently an ability to live, even though like our blood would be a dead blood, that blood is alive.
Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we've run out of time for tonight. Exonation, if you'd like to find out more information about Dr. Joye, her telephone number, her website is www.drjoye.com. That's drjoye.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break as the Exxon continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, where? Right here on the Talkstar Radio Network, Exxon Broadcast Network, and Star Cable.